Okay, just as we're getting seated, we heard in that terrific presentation just now about food insecurity, food security, and what an important issue that is. Actually, food systems are really at the heart of achieving many SDGs. Think about eradicating poverty, think about battling climate change, ensuring that there is economic growth for all. Think about food security and food systems as unlocking the key to accelerating action on SDGs. And so that's why we really want to take a look at food systems now. And I have a terrific panel of experts here to help me discuss this topic. So I'd like to introduce them to you now. To my direct right is Dr. Agnes Kalibata, President of the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. Next to Dr. Kalibata is Dr. Stefanos Fotiou, the Director of the UN Food Systems Coordination Hub and the Director of the Office of Sustainable Development Goals at the Food and Agriculture Organization. And Lana Weidgenant, the Campaigns and Policy Manager at ProVeg International. So, good morning and welcome to all of you. So, Dr. Kalibata, I'd like to start with you. I noticed that you had said recently, as a global community, we must mobilize technological, financial, and human resources to transform our food systems to protect people and the planet. What does it mean to transform food systems? Help us understand what that looks like.
Okay. So food systems impact all 17 SDGs. And when we launched the Food Systems Summit a number of years ago, 4 years ago now, the issue was recognizing fully well that our food systems are broken. There are a number of things that are happening that are really not adding up. They're impacting the environment. We have food, but with the number of people that are not feeding right is increasing every day. And then our consumption patterns are also completely impacting our environment. So transforming the food system is very critical to achieving all the 17 SDGs if we are going to be able to feed people and if we are going to be able to correct the damage that has been done to the environment, but also reduce and make sure that that type of damage doesn't continue happening.
That's a really important point. And you were saying just before our discussion that food systems actually matter to everyone. And if you look at everyone, we all care about how we get our food, how we consume it, how we produce it. And Dr. Fotio, if I could come to you, why do you think food systems are really at the heart of unlocking achievement on other SDGs as well?
I think it's at the heart because they're affecting all the main dimensions of development. I will not say only sustainable development. I'll give you an example. One of the big challenges we are facing, and we believe one of the big solutions to make our food systems more sustainable, is the food loss and waste. So food loss and waste doesn't mean only that by addressing it, we will create food for people and we will reduce hunger. But we estimate that food loss and waste is responsible about 38% of the global energy on the food systems. Let me say the number again. More than 1/3 of the energy that goes to the food systems is lost because of food loss and waste. So food systems is about energy. Food systems is about water. Food systems is about poverty. Food systems is about rural well-being. It's an amazing nexus that so far has created problems because of the way that food systems are developed, but it's also the holder of the solutions. And very frankly, if we solve the food problem, which is something that all of us we can do daily, we have done a giant step towards sustainable development. We can reduce emissions by 1/3. We can reduce the use of resources. We can provide more jobs to people. We can take people out of hunger and out of poverty. So this potential of the food systems to be really the nexus that it will make sustainable development happen is what makes them so important.
Interesting to think about them as a catalyst as well. Lana Weidgenant, coming to you, in an ideal world, what does a successful, sustainable food system look like?
Well, I think some great points have already been made, such as reduction of food waste and loss is extremely important for a more sustainable, equitable food system. But also, we need a food system that has less industrial animal agriculture on large scales, less deforestation, more sustainable, healthy, and plant rich consumption, particularly in global north countries like the United States, Western Europe, Australia. So for us to have this sustainable solution with food, I think some of the most important aspects that we've been raising internationally is to address where the problem is worst, where we see the food systems that are industrialized, that are monoculture, that have large-scale animal agriculture contributing to a massive amount of emissions and pollution, and also to pivot towards that solution. So that looks like reducing food loss and waste, having more sustainable agroecology production practices, and also addressing consumption not only in food loss and waste, but in diets, and having more plant-based diets around the world. And that can also be possible with more alternative protein innovation, looking into that, and also with the younger generation. I was one of the youth vice chairs for the UN Food Systems Summit, and the young generation is leading the change in changing our diets internationally.
That's a really interesting point there, bringing the youth in as well. Go ahead, Dr. Fortiu.
I couldn't agree more with Lana, and I want to compliment her because former Prime Minister Gordon Brown said that we need to make the ones that created the problem to pay. And I think what Lana is describing here, it's a problem of externalities that has been created by a system that created them. So we can solve all of this by finding out who has created the problem and make them fix the problem. I don't say punish them, but make them fix the problem.
Dr. Kalibata, what are some examples of some successful initiatives or strategies that have created sustainable food systems in Africa?
I mean, right now, some of the things that are beginning to happen on the African continent is really picking up on what the Food System Summit has done and having countries build on what the heads of states have committed, the national pathways they've committed, and really coming up with clear strategies on how to deal with environmental challenges while producing food, to deal with waste while producing food. Some of those are beginning to be areas that critically can ensure that we actually start fixing the problem. I guess one of the biggest challenges that we have to fix and think through right now is the whole idea of inclusion. We have so many people in Africa, 2 out of 3 mothers cannot feed their children the right meal. So just being able to also start looking at what is it in our midst in terms of local solutions, local foods, increasing diversity in food systems that has completely been overpowered now by, like you're saying, monofood systems. How do we go back to those food systems and start fixing them? But I guess the biggest challenge of all times for the African continent that we need to find solutions to is something we have no ability to find a solution to. It's called climate change, that is causing droughts and droughts and droughts and floods. And you're seeing that across the African continent. And I don't know whether Africa alone can do anything about that until we all as the world decide to do something. Yes, Africa can fix what it can. We can plant trees. We can manage how much water flows when it does come. We can manage floods in certain ways, but we cannot control what's happening globally. We learned from COVID-19 that what's happening in one part of the world is affecting all of us. And what we really need is not an African policy on climate change. We need a global policy to fix climate change. We need also countries to come through an adaptation. I mean, you just talked about what is going on in terms of damage. We are not paying for loss and damage, but what is going to happen to life? How many people have died only in the last week because of floods? How many people have died in the last year because of floods? Who pays for that? Who takes responsibility for that? Things we know we can avoid. So for me, it's not what Africa can do. It's what we can do as a global community to fix this problem that is leading to hunger, that is leading to death, that is leading to destruction of life as we know it.
Important point, I think, to make there. And Dr. Fortiu, if I could ask you, how can you enhance the resilience of food systems as they face these types of shocks that Dr. Kalibata was just talking about when it comes to climate change, of course, global conflict, extreme weather? How can you make sure that these systems are resilient but also remain sustainable at the same time?
So we need to start by understanding the vulnerabilities of the local communities. So that takes a kind of change in the way we are doing planning. Because many times the central planning is looking at macro outputs. So, for example, increase productivity, increase export, but it's not looking at the needs of the vulnerable groups and the vulnerable communities. So, for me, that's number one. Second is that once we understand what are the needs and how we can make them more strong, we need to design means of implementation, finance, budgets, governance, capacity development. And this is easy to be done because we have the capacity, we know many solutions. But we need a system that it will be looking at the needs of the vulnerable and not at the needs of the few. So the development system you have today, what it's doing is just looking only at the growth potential. I need to increase my GDP by this percentage. And it's missing how this could happen in a way that it will help the vulnerable, the poor, the ones that they left behind. So I think if the governments, with the support of the United Nations, they are focusing on starting from the needs of the vulnerable group, then the future will be more sustainable and it will be more resilient.
Can I say something about finance? What you just said about finance? I wanted to build on what the earlier speaker said. She said something called outcome related finance. Now, what happens in the food system in Africa, the way I see it, because a lot of financing happens through MDBs, through resources that come from multilateral institutions and stuff. But when you go to translate that financing, sometimes, and this is something we need to think through and understand, where does economic empowerment come from and how do we reduce poverty? You get what, $50 million to over 5 or 10 years across a population of 40 million people, and you translate it into per capita investment, and you realize that it's 0.0001. Now, what it does is it doesn't create any impact on the ground. Sorry, but I do appreciate what these institutions do, but does not translate into impact on the ground, especially given the challenges now. Number two, debt continues piling up. Never mind that very little impact was created, but debt piles up. Now you have a number of countries that have all this debt, and you're asking yourself, where does development go? How come it doesn't add up? But that's the reason it doesn't add up. Too little, too late, too far apart.
So more funding would be necessary.
Impact oriented,
Impact-
results oriented financing. Maybe these institutions don't have enough money to fund the type of development we are looking for as well.
We need some more international focus on food systems as well to back up all these different actions that are needed. For a long time, food systems has been overlooked, particularly in action against the international climate crisis and conversations on what is needed for climate action. Food systems is an extremely critical sector that has not been addressed sufficiently. And now when we're finally starting to get some more international attention, we need to make sure that it's done in the right way too. So making sure that we are talking about whole of food system, for instance, not only the production, but also the consumption, the food loss, everything that we need, and making sure that it's being done in a way that we're really putting forward the actions. For instance, as Dr. Kalibata was raising, we can't just put the blame on, for instance, what's happening in the African continent or what's happening in the Amazon rainforest, because what is happening there is not the decision of the local communities or the issues there. It's not something that only the local communities can fix, but it's being fueled by problems, by the consumption, by the demand from other countries. So it really is connected internationally, and we need to make sure that we are looking for those international solutions, for instance, addressing where it's coming from.
Dr. Fortio, we're talking about international solutions and often about governance. What role can the private sector play here in helping to advance more sustainable food systems, and what incentives exist or need to exist for that to actually happen?
I will put three keywords on the work of the private sector. One is innovations in solutions making. So we have seen the private sector addressing a number of issues in the past. So, for example, communication, information sharing, the digitalization revolution gave power to the people, I think. So there is a provider of solutions, there's a provider of innovation. My second keyword will be accountability. So we need the private sector to reach a level of accountability that the governments have reached. And sometimes I'm making the following question: why we are always asking only accountability from the governments? We need to ask accountability from the private sector, because actually it's the private sector that is profiting from the consumption of the people. So they need more accountability. And my third keyword for the private sector will be really something I would understand as responsibility towards the very big environmental problems. So we do know that because of decisions that they have been taken in the past, and it's not about accusing actually, it's because saying accepting the failure of business models, these business models need to change now. So there is evidence that today renewable energy is more efficient than fossil fuels and coal. So the private sector needs to adopt these new solutions. They need to change the business model that they have created part of the problem.
Dr. Kalibata, what's your thought on that?
No, I think private sector has huge opportunities to step forward and really be creative and innovative around how we can innovate the food system. I guess one of your earlier the panelists was talking about how we can create, rather than complain about gaps, how we can create ourselves going forward or innovate ourselves going forward. And I think there's a huge opportunity there for private sector to bring solutions on the table. When it comes to food loss and waste, for example, how does the retail system recognize that food loss and waste contributes 8% to emissions, but you can actually turn it into a solution if you move food that is getting to use by dates, if you move it in good enough time to give it to communities that need it, because like we said, there are lots of communities out there that are excluded from food. Now, that's not a loss. You're saving the environment lots of damage. You can also move it and compost it and turn it into the next way of fertilizing food the next day. I mean, there are so many things private sector can do, but most of all, they need to recognize that they own 90% probably of the food system, and food system is contributing to 30% emissions. And if we don't manage how food system is contributing carbon to the environment, then we are a big part of the problem. The failures of the food system when it comes to droughts, to floods, are partly caused by us in the food system. And private sector can do that, can source the right food, can ensure that the value chains in the food system are working in ways that reduce carbon, and can do the right thing. Yeah, yeah.
It feels a little bit like we're in a rainforest in here, doesn't it? Just with all this rain. Just as we have just 2 minutes left, I want to talk about scaling in the next 7 years. If you look at the next 7 years, what do you think is needed to be successful in making a sustainable food system or food systems? And what is your message to those on hand for this General Assembly week? So we can start with you, Dr. Kalibata.
I guess two things really. I mean, or three things. I mean, our governments must act. So we really want to see global action on food systems. All of us have to take action to fix the food system challenge. Financing, we need to ensure that we are financing the decarbonization of the food system so that it starts working for all of us. And then the last one, I would say, taking individual action. All of us are part of the food system. All of us know what is going wrong. So if we can start paying for the true cost of food, the true cost of food is environment, the true cost of food is water, the true cost of food is so many things that are happening out there. The true cost of food is labor of the farmers that are in the food system that are not being enumerated the right way. So if we can start asking ourselves, how did this food get here? And how much do I need to be paying to ensure that the whole system stays healthy? Then we can actually ensure that our world is going to a better place. It will not happen unless we as consumers start demanding that the right things happen.
To complement Agnes, for this to happen, I think we will need to enter into a serious discussion of a redistribution of power, the power of decision making when it comes to the food systems. The Secretary General, the day before yesterday, he said that power is not given, it's taken. So we are looking actually, and I think all of us, we need to look how power to the ones that they are suffering of the consequences of the unsustainable development model will be given. So, and actually, we do hope that the stakeholders, the groups will take the power, but I think we have a collective responsibility as a UN system to provide them the means that they take this power back.
As a youth advocate and non-state actor, it also emphasized the importance of the role of young people, of women, of having farmers, innovators those of us who are often outside of these spaces, really broaden as much as possible whenever you have the opportunity to, because that is a critical part of the solution and of redistributing that power. And then I would also say breaking down the silos. So for too long, food security has been talked about in a separate room from health, which has been talked about in a separate room from climate action. And we need to bring all of that together. And part of that is bringing food systems into the conversations, into the rooms where we are talking about health, about climate action, about the future. So making sure that we are bringing those conversations into one room as they're all part of the same problems and the same solutions.
I think you've all done that very effectively, brought food systems into the heart of this stage. Thank you so much for your insights. I hope all of you take a little bit of that with you through this week and remember how crucial food systems are for the rest of the SDGs as well. So thank you to my speakers, and hope you enjoy the rest of the program.
Thank you.